All right, Jared, you're on.
Great, great. Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. So I'll let Major Ali, his call sign is Rocket, introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liaquat Ali. My call sign is Rocket. I'm RPA comm officer in New York Air National Guard 107th Attack Wing. And we've been working this project with Ubico for since 2019 to find some, authentication type of work. Thank you, Jared.
Yeah, so I'll just kick it off as a background. I actually presented at one of the vital plenaries back before we had Authenticate, way before we had Authenticate, about the work that we did with NISC and particularly the NSTIC project, which is about trusted identities in cyberspace. And that actually kicked off into how do we actually scale strong authentication to citizen-facing services. We started the project with different organization was some school districts. We completed one actually school district for Palo Alto in 2019. And right around this time, the pilot was kind of winding down, but two things kind of made us rethink, hey, maybe we have an opportunity to for additional pilot organization to help extend some of the learnings that we want to provide the ecosystem. And during this time, actually Apple expanded their iOS or their FIDO support in their platforms. Now we thought, well, in the Palo Alto School District, one of the calls was that they didn't have the option to use FIDO authentication on iOS devices. So we thought, no, this is a perfect opportunity to see if we can find someone else that can really leverage this new platform capability and also really think through what it is to provide these type of capabilities for citizen-facing services. And then obviously right around the start of 2020, we have a very interesting pandemic situation. But we were really excited to have Major Ali's team really on board to prove out what they could experience with the FIDO authentication, but really kind of bring it to the next level and some of the things that they were experiencing in the field remotely. And then we'll talk through some of that. So I'll hand it over to the Major to discuss the situation that we're in as we got into 2020 and the pilot kicked off with them.
Thank you, Jared, for the background to the project. First, I'd like to share some insights into the Air National Guard so you can understand the project's importance for our workforce. So the majority of our members serve part-time. They perform unit training assembly 1 week in a month or 2 weeks annual tour once a year. Beyond that, members do not have access to secure systems to perform work or take personal or take care of personal or financial matters. So my wing has been exploring secure mobile-derived credential access to DoD systems since 2019. The NIST grant and the COVID-19 pandemic presented some opportunities and challenges to telework capabilities. So along with the nationwide COVID health measures, all units were directed to remote work, protect our workforce. When the mandate went into effect, the unit ranging in size from several hundred to several thousand airmen had minimum to no telework capability, which degraded the mission and individual readiness. So the technology advancements in International Guard is always needed, but can be a bit slow. So when the NIST grant was offered to improve the cybersecurity, we had no problem identifying a system that only used username and password. So in the next slide, I'll talk about how we selected the project. So I lead the innovation branch in my wing. So we knew the YubiKey hard token capability were more secure than text or email authentication. So during the system search, we looked at common access card enabled DoD systems, and also federal systems that used username password with text message or email authentication. A note on the CAC, it has multiple uses. So it's an ID card that we use to access DoD web-based systems and also facility access. So for the project, we selected the New York State Disaster Local Area, which is DLAN system that was accessible only by username password. It had a user base of civilians, dual status military members with civilian jobs. So for the future state, we ultimately wanted to support the CAC enable access for personnel, smart and mobile devices. So we selected the DLAN to leverage the YubiKeys derived credentials capability and use the authentication factor. This project is also foundational for our bring your own approved device, which also BYOAD program being contemplated for fielded within the total force. The CAC logon option may not be available everywhere for the BYOAD. And also we wanted the additional authentication capability that met strong phishing resistant authentication, and FIDO web and logon options made a lot of sense to us. So with this foundation in mind, I'll discuss the areas of concerns and how we resolve them. So with any organization, with most innovation efforts, we try to anticipate technology barriers like the buy-in from decision makers. So here's some of the concerns we encountered and how we resolved them. So as noted before, we selected DLAN because it was a non-federal system and a system access was username password. The second criteria that was used, it had to be civilian workforce. So our National Guard members are unique because they are citizen airmen. So our project started back February 2020, which was coincided with the COVID-19. So we were not lined up with our budget cycle, people, resources to fully dedicate to the project. Also, our wing was not the DLAN system owner. So instead we got creative and made my wing the lead agency and established an agreement with DMNA that allowed us to take on the project. So this arrangement led us to prove that the identity proofing with ID.me enhanced manual identity verification process and also more secure authentication factor with YubiKeys. So lastly, in accessing the system risk factors, DLAN was good because it did not contain operational data or PII, which is personal identifiable information. So in transition, so in the summary, we selected the system with minimum concerns and we addressed the concerns early to mitigate the problems. But next, we'll learn about the user experience from Jared.
Thanks, Major. So that's the context of what we were operating under. So what we were trying to prove out is really this end-to-end experience. So what we talked about, kind of a step-up journey beyond username and password, the whole cycle when you're remote. And the objective was to be able to strongly ID proof the individual, right? And then bind that strong authentication to the proof user and make it as seamless as possible for the user to get in the system in a very highly assured way, right? Both at a IL level 2 and above, and an AL level 3. So this was the user experience that the team wanted to create end-to-end, which is when you log in to the account, you're given the opportunity to then do the remote ID proofing. And at the same time, not every individual has the authenticator at hand, that you were able to then order the authenticator that you want. And when it's delivered, you can continue the registration of the authenticated, the proofed identity, do the registration and the binding, which we believe that's one of the key principles that we were trying to build in the pilot group when we started the grant, which was how do we actually get this in practice? We need to find, right, the identity proof individual with the strong auth capabilities, and then be able to log on. And at that point in time, we sort of stitch together these things end to end. Now, interestingly enough, we've always wanted to achieve this in our industry for some time. I think the pandemic compelled the industry to solve this problem. And so we actually experienced, as Major mentioned, both the challenges and benefits of having the pandemic and really being able to drive this all the way home because this is what the end users actually need. So we wanted to show you the whole end-to-end experience in a video and give a sense that this is available and for a reference architecture to build as the ecosystem grows. One thing Major Ali did mention was that we work with ID.me, who is the both the IDP as well as the ID proofing service, and then stitch that up together with the log on to the application, which is the defense system. So we'll see the video, and I think we'll be pretty clear on what we did.
From dmna.disasterland.org, the user will click on Order YubiKeys with ID.me to begin the login process. Here, they will create an ID.me account using a valid email address and password. Before ID proofing, the user must choose from one of 3 initial MFA options. This creates a binding between their proofed identity and the selected authenticator. This is a consent screen authorizing ID.me to collect biometric data. Once the user receives the text message, they will follow instructions to take photos of identifying documentation and take a selfie. The user's identity has been verified. They will now enter their social security number. Here is where they will select either the YubiKey 5 NFC or the 5 CI for their devices and provide their mailing address. The user then reviews their order and confirms the correct information gets submitted to UB Enterprise Delivery. The user's information has been submitted. They should receive an email that provides the shipment information when the keys have shipped and another when the keys have been delivered. With security key in hand, the user will select Sign in with ID.me to begin the login process. The user now selects the previously registered MFA option and authenticates. Note that once the user has authenticated using their originally registered MFA method, they will now be required to use their YubiKey or another registered security key to access the site. The user will now register the required security key, first making sure the security key is plugged in. The user will now set up the security key and expressly allow ID.me to see the make and the model of their key. Once the user touches the security key, the registration is complete and that account is secured with that YubiKey. At any point after this step, the user may opt to edit their ID.me MFA settings and remove less secure MFA options. If the user clicks Continue, they will reach an authorization screen. Here, the user permits ID.me to share identity information with DLAN using SAML 2.0. This single sign-on experience logs the user into DLAN, where they may view tasks, mission, deployment, and other relevant information.
Great. So we just roughly go through the architecture components here, as you just saw. So we were really focusing on trying to get to the IL level 2 more remote ID proofing, both supervised and unsupervised. The supervised scenarios are in some situations selfie and sort of pictures that they take weren't necessarily able to capture everything. It's kind of a remote supervised provisioning or ID proofing session. But really wanted to also introduce, obviously, the FIDO strong authentication in the way that we can actually bind it to the user identities. And that is delivered through the IDV system, again, as both the IDP as well as the ID proofing service. And then this is the DLAN application, obviously, when you log in, then you get single sign-on, demo to access the applications. And then we also coupled it with, as you saw, a delivery service with a delivery API built in. So from a user experience, it was very important that one of the things that you saw was that if you're going through the whole ceremony to ID proof yourself, you show your driver's license and you have your address and everything, it would be a very simple click through to say, look, yeah, just please send me the authenticator as well in the entire flow. And so we really made it very simplified, very intuitive for the end user to just create the experience for the end user to get the end-to-end workflow. Now, one thing that we didn't get to the project in time was that IDMe system didn't complete the platform authentication options during the pretty accelerated timeline for the pilot. And that was one of the additional options that we were looking to have implemented in the user flows if we had it. For example, while waiting for your secondary security key or your additional security key, you could register the platform authenticator right at that point in time when you ID proof the user, what we thought was a very powerful way if someone had a device that supported the platform authenticators. So unfortunately, the IDMe system didn't manage to get it rolled out in time for the pilot. So now I actually like to turn it back to Major I to talk about some of the project highlights and the learnings, which I think is really important as we come out with a project like this.
So here are some project highlights. Thank you, Jared. So we had 50% reduction in administrative costs by integrating ID.me and identity proofing and YubiKey delivery. It's invaluable to be able to leverage private sector resources that provide and combine reliable ID proofing with YubiKey delivery to our large and spread out workforce. So 70% of the respondents feel more secure when using ID.me and YubiKey to access DLAN information. So over 60% responded are comfortable using ID.me as identity provider for other services. So we expect the comfort level to increase since ID.me is becoming more common for access to federal government services like Veteran Affairs Benefit and the IRS. And the 70% of responded report using their YubiKey for other personal accounts. So whenever a user choose to use a YubiKey with their services that are not mandated by work, we see an increase in adoption of the keys and increase with stickiness. So 94% were able to complete the ID proofing process remotely. So in the next slide, I'll be sharing the lesson learned. So the biggest thing is like when dealing with COVID-19 and then the competing priorities for the state or the wing, the staff availability as well as DMNA, 100% system owners, stakeholders, and turnover. first and most important, the internal champions are vital to the success. So as a project start, we had the top level support from the 107, the TAC wing, and the DMNA. So we saw the immediate adaptation and the usage when the time frame between ID proofing and security key delivery and ordering was short. Knowing the ecosystem of the operating system, the devices and who control them was important when trying to resolve the problems and issues. So our adoption rate stalled in the pilot phase. We increase opt-in rates by showing and telling. So the YubiKeys can use CAC card derived credentials and get CAC card access with personal devices. So this shows that when the authenticator is used for more than one service or application, is greatly increased in adoption. So these were the key learning for the future expansion and ID proofing and security key usage. I'll talk way forward in the next slide about, what's the next destination for us. So with learning from this project, we can showcase how the integration of similar systems with ID.me and YubiKey can be easily replicated elsewhere in New York or beyond. So we anticipate increased YubiKey user adoption across the total force and the DoD. So the total force will consist of active duty, Air National Guard, Reserve, federal, state, civilian personnel, contractors, Army, Navy, other branches as well. So our planned use will be to use the Defense Information System Agency purebred application to store CAC card derived credentials on YubiKeys, and this will provide a plug and play access to the DoD CAC enabled applications. It's a huge benefit to just use them, one item, a YubiKey, instead of both mobile CAC, CAC reader and the CAC card for the system access. So the ANG has decentralized many personnel and financial tasks to the airmen. So with remote secure access, airmen can do a self-help task, even expedite their mobility and deployment processes. So we believe that ID.me and YubiKey can be used for U.S. Any force retirees, could be family population, for accessing personnel, financial, and medical system. So this concludes my part of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point. Jared, over to you. You want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it well. I think one of the key learnings we've seen across many deployments is that when the authenticator is used for more than one service or application, as you mentioned, you really accelerate adoption because people can use it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to come in remotely. This was a great presentation. Is there any questions? I have some questions in the app, if there's any in the room. Okay. With regard to the delivery of the security key, is there a mechanism by which you can be assured that the person that's received the key is then the right user that's enrolling that key once they've received it? Or is there a need for that, and are you considering that?
So I think that the delivery system is driven by an API and from an address perspective. So the two things that you can double check there. So in this pilot itself, it was I would say kind of a standard device from Yubico that anyone could have received it, I guess, from buying from Amazon as well. But in sort of future destination discussions, you could make that sort of customizable in some ways. But in this case, the the risk was low. We wanted to get the pilot going, so the delivery was most important to get and authenticated to the user as the quickest, most effective way. And I think in the pilot, we supported the expedited delivery option, which is like, I think, overnight or something like that, because we had those capabilities. So in this particular situation, it wasn't a critical path if you got authenticated in different means. But certainly, there are some organizations that would care, and there are several ways that you can do that. I think that the working group has worked on things like enterprise attestation, right, or customizable grids and things like that. So some organizations do care, and you can create a service to be pretty pinpoint on that one.
All right, thank you. That was really helpful answer. And then just a kind of a question regarding timeline. So is there a timeline for moving, from pilot and expanding, and then how does that relate to, in terms of timing, what you're thinking about the platform authenticator? So is the thought to expand through security keys for a while before moving to implement platform authenticators? Anything you can share on that?
Yeah, so the platform authenticator support is a purely an IDMe roadmap item. We understand from that team that they are working on it. I would say that most of the IDPs have thought about these options as they expand their roadmap. I think, as we know, security key introduction was much earlier than platform authenticators. So most of the services have security keys for first. I think they're looking to platform authenticators to expand and grow their capabilities. So I think if there was specific ask on platform authenticators for IDMe, I think we're happy to direct them to IDMe. There's an IDMe roadmap conversation at this point.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much, Jared. Thank you, Major Ali, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.